Russia's fuel supply is collapsing. In July 2026 alone, Russian gasoline imports from Belarus surged 13% to a record 212,000 metric tons, while diesel imports doubled to 162,000 tons. Russia, the world's second-largest oil exporter, is now importing fuel from its neighbor because Ukrainian drone strikes have reduced domestic refining capacity by one-third. For the first time since the Soviet era, Moscow cannot meet its own fuel needs. To understand why this moment matters, we need to examine the strategic shift that has occurred in this conflict. For more than 4 years, Russia has waged a brutal war of attrition against Ukraine. The invasion, which began in February 2022, has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced millions. But the character of this conflict has evolved dramatically. What began as a conventional ground war has transformed into a war of deep strikes, economic warfare, and technological innovation. Russia's strategy has been blunt and relentless: massive artillery barrages, glide bombs reducing Ukrainian cities to rubble, waves of drones and missiles targeting civilian infrastructure. Moscow has banked on its ability to outlast Ukraine's Western support, betting that time and winter's cold would break Ukrainian resolve. But Ukraine has responded with a strategy of its own, one that targets the very arteries of Russia's war economy. The Institute for the Study of War reports that Ukraine's campaign against Russian oil infrastructure has achieved something remarkable. Russian gasoline output has fallen to 65% of its seasonal average consumption, while diesel production has dropped to roughly half of the seasonal average. These are not temporary disruptions, they represent a structural degradation of Russia's refining capacity. Let's get into the hard data. On August 6, 2026, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine's defense forces had struck 2 major Russian oil refineries in long-range attacks. The targets were the Slavneft-Yanos refinery in Yaroslavl, one of Russia's biggest, processing approximately 15 million tons of crude oil annually, and the Bashneft-Novoil refinery in Bashkortostan. The Yaroslavl attack was particularly significant. Regional Governor Mikhail Evrev called it the largest ever attack by enemy drones on the region, reporting that 93 drones were shot down by air defense and electronic warfare units. But despite the interception claim, falling debris struck the refinery's storage tanks, igniting massive fires. Verified videos and images shared on social media show huge plumes of black smoke rising from the facility, with at least 4 separate fires visible at the site. 4 people were injured by shrapnel. The Bashneft-Novoil strike, located nearly 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine, demonstrates Ukraine's expanding long-range strike capability. These are not just tactical victories, they are strategic blows to Russia's ability to finance and sustain its war effort. The cumulative effect is now undeniable. Reuters, citing 2 industry sources and its own calculations, reported that Russian imports of gasoline and diesel from Belarus reached record highs in July 2026. Gasoline imports increased 13% to 212,000 metric tons, while diesel imports doubled to 162,000 tons. This is extraordinary. Russia, historically a net fuel exporter, is now importing significant quantities to compensate for domestic shortages. Russian sources themselves confirm the problem. ISW reports that Russia's gasoline output fell to 65% of its seasonal average consumption, while diesel production fell to about half the seasonal average as of early July 2026. These shortages have become acute during the busy summer tourist season, forcing Moscow to rely increasingly on Belarusian imports since May 2026. The broader strike campaign has been relentless. Russia's defense ministry claimed on August 7th that its forces shot down and destroyed 397 Ukrainian drones over Russian territory, annexed Crimea, and the Sea of Azov. On August 5th, Russian authorities reported intercepting 605 Ukrainian drones across multiple regions. But these intercept numbers tell their own story. Ukraine is launching drones at such scale that Russia's air defenses are being stretched to their limits. So what's driving this unprecedented campaign? The strategic logic is twofold: increase the cost of war for Russia, while exposing vulnerabilities in its defense and economic systems. First, Ukraine is systematically targeting Russia's oil and gas sector, the revenue stream that funds Putin's war machine. President Zelensky has explicitly stated that these strikes are part of an effort to reduce Russia's ability to finance the war. By hitting refineries, storage tanks, and distribution networks, Ukraine is attacking the Kremlin's financial lifeline. Second, Ukraine is exploiting Russia's resource constraints. By forcing Russia to spread its air defense assets thin across thousands of kilometers of territory, from the front lines in Donetsk to the suburbs of Moscow, Ukraine creates gaps in coverage that can be exploited for future strikes. Russian air defenses are now being forced to defend oil refineries in Bashkortostan and Yaroslavl, resources that might otherwise be deployed to protect frontline positions. The timing is significant. Ukraine has stepped up its attacks on Russian oil refineries in recent months, causing fuel shortages that the authorities have stabilized in many parts of Russia, though government officials admit problems remain in some areas. The pattern suggests a deliberate campaign of attrition rather than opportunistic strikes. Russia's response reveals a command structure under pressure. On August 5th, President Vladimir Putin announced a major military reshuffle. He created a new branch of the military, the Unmanned Systems Forces, and appointed Colonel General Denis Lyamin to head it. Putin described Lyamin as one of the most qualified specialists for the role and tasked him with completing the new branch's formation and taking command in the near future. Putin also replaced key frontline commanders. Colonel General Andrei Ivanayev was appointed to command the Center Group of Forces, tasked with capturing the entirety of the Donetsk region, an operation Putin himself described as critical and high risk. And Colonel General Valery Solodchuk, formerly commander of the Center Group, was elevated to Deputy Minister of Defense responsible for logistics. These command changes are a sign of desperation. When you replace commanders and restructure the military mid-war, you're admitting that the previous structure wasn't working. Putin's statement that Russia is continuing to perfect the organizational structure of the defense ministry is Kremlin speak for, "We are losing and we need to try something different." The economic strain on Russia is intensifying. The fuel shortages are not merely a military problem, they are beginning to affect ordinary Russians. The fuel crisis has been acute during Russia's busy summer tourist season, when demand for gasoline and diesel typically peaks. Russia's reliance on Belarusian imports to compensate represents a significant vulnerability. The imports are not just expensive, they demonstrate that Russia's domestic refining capacity can no longer meet civilian and military demand simultaneously. The damage is not limited to refineries. Ukrainian strikes have targeted warehouses and logistics facilities as well. Russian online retailer Wildberries has been hit around a dozen times since mid-July, with the series of strikes killing at least 8 people and knocking out a large chunk of the company's storage capacity. Ukraine accuses the e-commerce giant, sometimes referred to as Russia's Amazon, and employing tens of thousands of people, of storing drone parts and helping the Russian army. Ukrainian strikes on commercial warehouses are beginning to cause significant financial losses for Russian retail companies. The co-founder of Ukrainian online marketplace Rozetka stated on August 6 that Russian strikes against Rozetka facilities have caused billions of hryvnias worth of direct losses. Forbes Ukraine reported that Russian strikes since July 2026 have destroyed over 400,000 square meters of warehouse and logistics facility space belonging to Ukrainian postal and retailing entities. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to suffer devastating attacks. On August 5th, a massive Russian missile and drone attack on Kiev and the surrounding region killed at least 17 people and wounded over 40. A cloud of smoke hovered over the capital at sunrise after the attack sparked fires in several locations. 8 people were killed in a strike on a train station on the eastern edge of Kiev, where an AFP journalist saw several bodies covered with white sheets next to the train tracks. Critically, Ukraine was unable to shoot down any of the ballistic missiles fired in that attack. This reveals a critical vulnerability. Ukraine is running dangerously low on interceptor missiles for its Patriot air defense systems. President Zelensky warned that missile deliveries from allies have dropped to just 1/3 of the 2025 level in the first half of 2026. Ballistic interceptors are what could have saved the lives of those killed today, Zelensky said. The Russian attacks overnight mainly targeted warehouses, with some strikes on infrastructure and a railway station. Logistics centers of the general merchandise chain Epicenter were struck, burning one hub completely to the ground and killing an employee. 3 people working at a postal sorting center were also killed, and online retailer Rozetka said it suffered its 3rd attack that week. The ripple effects of this conflict extend far beyond Ukraine and Russia. The war has fundamentally reshaped European security architecture, energy markets, and global alliances. NATO is at a crossroads. The alliance's strategic objective is clear: ensure Ukraine can defend itself without triggering a direct military confrontation with Russia. But achieving that balance is becoming increasingly difficult. The intensifying Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities, coupled with Ukraine's aggressive drone strikes against Russian territory, are raising the temperature on both sides. European unity on sanctions is under strain. Britain announced new sanctions against 6 Russian banks, 6 ships, and an India-based vessel management company. But the EU continues to struggle with implementing new packages as member states demand exemptions and exceptions to protect their own economic interests. The constraints are real. After sanctioning roughly 3,200 individuals and entities, there are fewer targets left to sanction. The United States remains the linchpin. President Donald Trump's approach has been unpredictable. At the NATO summit in July, he indicated the U.S. would grant Ukraine a license to produce Patriot missiles. 3 weeks later, he said no final decision had been made. The proposed Lindsey Graham Sanctioning Russia Act could significantly increase pressure on the Kremlin, targeting the shadow fleet of tankers carrying Russian oil and imposing tariffs on countries that continue to buy Russian energy. But with Trump's administration, nothing is certain. China and India are watching closely. Both countries have maintained trade relationships with Russia, buying discounted oil and gas that offset some of the impact of Western sanctions. Russian oil exports have remained high because of these buyers. Bloomberg reported that Russia is exporting near-record amounts of crude because its refineries can't process it. The shadow fleet has become a battleground. Russia has been conspicuously flaunting its ability to evade sanctions. But Ukrainian drone strikes against cargo ships and tankers in the Black Sea are changing the risk calculus. Russian insurance companies have stopped covering military risks for Black Sea shipping. If proposed U.S. sanctions target the shadow fleet directly, it could deal a serious blow to Russia's ability to export oil. The EU's transfer of frozen Russian asset profits to Ukraine is setting a precedent, but it's a fraction of what Ukraine needs. Zelensky has warned that Russia intends to significantly increase its ballistic missile production before winter, targeting Ukraine's energy sector again. If Western air defense supplies continue to lag, Ukraine's power grid could face devastating damage. So where does this leave us? Ukraine's drone campaign has inflicted serious damage on Russia's war economy. Refining capacity has been cut to the point that Russia now relies on record imports of fuel from Belarus. The Kremlin is reorganizing its military command, creating new drone forces, and appointing new generals. But these are defensive moves, reactions to Ukrainian initiatives, not proactive strategies. The fundamental question is one of endurance. Can Ukraine sustain its strike campaign as winter approaches and its Patriot interceptors run low? Can Russia's economy absorb the cumulative damage of sanctions and drone strikes without breaking? And can the West maintain the unity and resolve needed to see this through? The Ukrainian strike campaign is not a silver bullet, but it has achieved something remarkable. It has brought the war to Russia in ways that ordinary Russians can no longer ignore. From oil refineries to logistics warehouses, Ukraine is making the cost of war visible on Russian soil. Putin may have started this war, but Ukraine has demonstrated that Russia cannot fight it without paying a price on its own territory. What will happen when the Russian economy starts to buckle and the Russian people start to feel the pain in their daily lives? That's the question that should be troubling the Kremlin most of all. If you want to stay informed on this developing story, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And let me know in the comments. Do you think Ukraine's drone campaign will force Putin to change course? Or will Russia simply absorb the damage and continue its grinding offensive?